I'm delighted to welcome today Stuart Webb, who has a scientific background which he uses to help people in business to generate leads, manage businesses, all kinds of fangled things. So that's very technical. I use technical jargon, Stuart, as you'll appreciate. I'm not a scientist.
Thanks, Elaine. Yes, no, very few people are scientists, but yeah, my background is a bit different to most people that sort of enter into the world of business. I started my entrepreneurial journey sort of starting and scaling businesses after a few years as a scientist and realizing that perhaps I was more interested in doing that than I was in spending the hours that I needed to in the laboratory. So, and it's a change of direction. But I still use those principles. They're ingrained, and I've used them to help me to understand exactly how I do what I do.
Brilliant, and that's a good point. Lots of people don't realise how transferable their skills are. Lots of people, when I used to do career mentoring 100 years ago, people would say to me, "Oh, but I'm in this industry sector. I don't know anything else." Well, yes, you do. In life, we all go through different patterns and different chapters and so on and so forth, but you carry your skills with you wherever you go. So it's great that you've managed to repurpose the knowledge that you had. So how come you were a scientist, Stuart? Let's start off there.
Well, just on that point that you've just said, I know that I'm working with some students at the moment, Elaine, and in actual fact, it was to one of them that I recently said they are now at that stage in their career where, leaving school and university, they have the opportunity to have 2 or 3 careers because they are likely to be working into their potentially 70s and 80s, and they have got the opportunity to reinvent themselves 2 or 3 times. You know, we no longer have to stick with the one career, do we? And that's kind of where I came from. I left school thinking about the only thing that I wanted to do. I was absolutely fascinated by one particular thing in science. It was all about how the cell is controlled by the DNA. And I was absolutely determined to go and crack all the world around that particular subject. So I left school with an absolute intention to do that. And I went into university and then postgraduate studies through all the levels of various degrees and then started working on that. And I was deeply immersed at the time in a field of virology, of quite a narrow field of understanding how persistent viruses get into a cell and take it over and control it. And I was absolutely fascinated by this. And as I started trying to get more knowledge about how this worked, I connected the university I was at the time to what was becoming the internet. And I started working on how to sort of spread the understanding onto the internet. And I just found myself fascinated by this. How do I spread this knowledge on this new thing called the internet? I came across Tim Berners-Lee, who was developing the World Wide Web at the time, and I thought, this is just transformational. I suddenly had my eyes opened. I now want to go and do this. This is where I want to now spend myself. So it's that sort of, you come across something, you remain curious for your life. If you continue to be curious, you find these opportunities where you sort of go, yeah, I can take all of my knowledge that I've used, but I'm now curious about exploring this. So I went off and I explored how I started businesses that were enabling people to use this thing called the internet.
Brilliant. And what you've also just explained, possibly unwittingly, to some people, is how Bill Gates can go from computer nerd to say health expert when knowing nothing about it. It's the concept of spreading things, viruses, knowledge, information.
Stay curious. And that's once again, I spend some of my time not only working with business owners, trying to help them. They're normally very technically very competent people, but I can help them turn that very technical competence into something very practical. But I also work with some students who are either starting businesses or trying to start their career. And the one thing that I had as a lecture I gave recently to a group of MBA students who are sort of there, going through the how do I now leave university and go out into the world of work? And one of them said, I want to start a business. And I said, okay, so how are you going to do that? He said, I'm going to look for a good idea. And I said, can I really encourage you? Stop looking for a good idea. Look for a problem that you think you can solve, because that's actually the way that you actually start a business. You don't look for a good idea or a money-making scheme. The best businesses are started by those people that have got a desire to solve a problem. And that's kind of where I came from. I wanted to solve problems. I now want to help other people solve problems, but I wanted to solve a problem.
And that's actually a good description for businesses, isn't it? Because if a business doesn't solve a problem, it ain't a business.
And, you know, I say this now to business owners that I work with. You know, so many of them say things like, well, you know, I don't know how to go out and sell this to people. And my immediate response is, well, stop trying to sell it to everybody. Start looking for the person who has the problem that you think you can solve, and ask them if they'd like your help to solve the problem. If you've got the solution and you know how to solve their problem, and you sort of help them to recognize they've got a problem, and then you say, now I've got the solution, would you like my help to solve your problem? They will buy the solution from you because they've understood the value that you're going to bring by solving the problem for them. So too many people look at it as, what do I do to persuade, or what do I do to get them to buy it? Or isn't selling dirty because it's all about sort of forcing somebody to buy something that they don't want? It's not. It's all about helping somebody to understand how you can help them. And if you're genuinely helping them and they've genuinely got a problem, they will snatch it out of your hand. It's nothing to do with you selling it.
Absolutely true. It's. I suppose you could argue that it's persuasion, which is a softer version of selling. But even then, it's almost like foul language, isn't it? Because you're trying to make somebody do something that doesn't really feel right. It doesn't even talking about it doesn't feel right to me, because it's I think it was the early 90s I got introduced to NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And at that time, it was mostly used by salespeople to try and educate the people they were selling to, you know, copying their behavior, anchoring, lots of different terms that are used. And now NLP is very successfully used in health and well-being. But for years, I didn't go anywhere near it because it had such a bad reputation for selling. And selling to me is a forcing thing. As you say, find the problem, find the solution, or have the solution, and then find the people that got the problem. And then, you know, it's the other way around to what most people consider as a business.
Absolutely is, Elaine. Absolutely.
Who do you help then, Stuart? What type of businesses?
So I help people who are normally selling from one business to another, and they're normally selling something which is what I call trying to sell the invisible. So let's give you an example. I'm working at the moment with somebody who has got a successful telemarketing business, but largely the help that she's trying to sell to somebody is something that they can't put their finger on. It's not a thing that you can count. What it is this: if we help to make contact with a few more people, then you'll get more sales because you'll be in front of more people. Well, that's a bit difficult to quantify in many respects. So one of the things I do is I take my clients through a process of turning the invisible into something which is productized. How do I persuade somebody that this thing has got a structure to it? It's got a series of steps, and you can measure those steps to see how successful it is. So we talk an awful lot about how do we productize a service. And productizing a service is quite an art, but at the same time, it's about recognizing that the intangible, the things which sort of move from sort of going to somebody and talking about an idea of how you might help them through to something which actually happens, has a series of steps. And each of those steps can be thought of as a sort of page in a book. So we try and map out what the book is and how you are going to get the reader of the book to go from page to page to page to page. And that is how you sort of turn the invisible into something much more tangible.
So that's a good description, because when we have a service, people can't see a service, can they? You know when you've experienced a service, whether it's been good or bad, but actually when you're signing up for a service, you really don't know what you're getting. So I like the idea of breaking things down, and so you're deconstructing the service and putting it into a kind of a product. And I love that.
And then once you've got that product, once you understand how that product can be essentially written in a book, then you are able to sort of write the script and turn that book into something which you can actually see and do.
So with the telemarketing, that's quite a straightforward type of thing, really, isn't it? I suppose, because you're phoning somebody. I can see it in my mind. I'm not explaining it very well, but I can see from what you've described. I can see how turning the pages of the book, you do this, you say that, and then this happens. So what other examples can you give?
Well, let me give you another example of somebody I'm working with at the moment. They run an international school, and they're trying to attract more students to come from places like the Philippines in order to come to the UK, learn English, and then also pick up more business skills. Now, that's a very intangible thing, but what you can do is you can explain to the people in the Philippines the outcome of coming and learning better English, and then learning English in a European context, so that they can go and work in places all around the world, because English is a language. So we've had to turn that teaching and the outcomes into a journey. We talk about the fact that they get outcomes from this that they can use in other ways other than just being able to speak better English. So it's about, once again, translating this invisible journey, the learning, into the how do we make that into something which can be measured by those people who have got the desire to do it.
I think the measurement is important as well, isn't it? Because so many people think they're not making progress, and then when they look back on where they were maybe 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 6 months ago, that's when you realize, actually, well, look at this progress. So measurement is a very important part, and of course would have formed a big part of your scientific training background.
Exactly. That's where it comes back to everything that I've just said, that by doing some of this, I've translated some of what I was doing there, which was trying to regularize some steps in a thing which took me from an idea into a measured outcome. And I used a very rigid set of formula in order to be able to do that. I had to stick to some very rigid formula because I had to be able to repeat it again and again and again and again. And unless you can repeat it again and again and again, you can't actually demonstrate that you've really done what you've said you've done. So I had to learn to re-employ some of these principles when I came into business to make those regularly learned and scheduled activities.
And that's a problem for a lot of people, because many entrepreneurs that I've met along the way, we're not consistent people. We do things rather haphazard and on the fly and intuitively and so on. So measurement is really difficult. So having somebody like you to guide, to set out what the steps are, so that we can then measure against, sounds very, very, very sensible to me.
And you're absolutely right, Elaine. I learned very early. Well, I learned far too late in my entrepreneurial journey that the stuff that I thought I had to throw away, this very rigid set of thinking as a scientist, that I could actually apply really effectively. It took me a few years until I eventually thought, there's something, all of that background I've got, I shouldn't just throw it away. I should be using it again and again. And now I do it regularly. And I hate to use the word codified, but I turned it into a set of rules. I turned around and I say, look, here's a tool, a template to follow. You do this, and this. This is the outcome you'll get. And it's repeatable, because if you always do the same thing, you'll get the same result. What I find is too many people apply the wrong set of rules at the time that they're in. I have something like 200 odd tools in the toolkit I have, but it's the art of picking the right tool and applying it in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the right context. It's I suppose it's a bit like storytelling, but you start with the end of the story. So it's the outcome, and then you work backwards, I guess, and then work out what steps are required from where the person is now to what outcomes they want, and then in the middle of that there's some steps and probably a variation you might have to try until you get the right steps.
Absolutely right.
So how do people find you, Stuart? Where do you hang out? What's your website and the socials?
Well, if you go to scientificbuildingmachine.com, you'll find me there.
Scientificbuildingmachine.com.
Science. Oh gosh, how appalling of me. Scientificvaluebuildingmachine.com. I couldn't even remember my own website, Elaine. That's an appalling admission. www.scientificvaluebuildingmachine.com.
Gosh, that's a mouthful. Okay.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, it's science, it's value building, and it's a machine. It's kind of simple, but at the same time, far too complicated for me to remember, obviously.
And are you on socials, LinkedIn or anything like that?
I am. I'm on LinkedIn, and you'll find me on LinkedIn as Stuart Webb. Keep it simple for those of us that are struggling to understand their websites. And you'll also find me on places like Twitter and Instagram, and then you can see the other company that's the umbrella behind that, which is The Complete Approach.
And Stuart is Stuart for those who are listening on a podcast, as opposed
to... It
is
Stuart.
Marvellous. Thank you very much for your time today, Stuart. It's been lovely getting to know a bit more about what you do, and I look forward to connecting with you again sometime.
That's going to be great, Elaine. I'd love to do it.
Thank you.